All right, so sleep, it restores, replenishes, and rebuilds our brains and our bodies. Some neuroscientists believe sleep gives neurons a chance to shut down and to repair themselves. During infancy, a newborn will sleep about 16 to 17 hours per day, so quite a bit. But it's not always in a rhythmic pattern. It's just kind of hit or miss. They're going to sleep when they sleep, and they're going to be awake when they're awake. By 6 months, infants move closer to an adult-like sleeping pattern, with the longest span of sleep during the night and the longest span of waking is during the day. Nighttime waking is going to be the most common infant sleep-related problem. And they have surveys with parents that indicate 20 to 30% of infants have difficulty going to sleep and staying asleep during the night. About half of an infant's sleep time is in REM sleep compared to adults. They only have about 1/5 of their sleep time is in REM sleep. Rapid eye movement is what that's called, and you're probably dreaming during that time. What they are thinking now is that REM sleep, the kind of dreaming, is might help to promote brain development. So the point of that is you definitely want your child to sleep as much as possible, as much as they need for the development of the brain. For adults, when they're having the rapid eye movement, they are dreaming. We don't know for sure if infants are dreaming because we can't ask them. On the shared sleeping, some people say that there is benefits to shared sleeping, and some people are quite opposed to it. This is the idea that the baby sleeps in the same bed as you. We will get a little bit, I'm going to have to create a separate lecture on the idea of sleep training. They don't actually talk about it in this book. They usually do talk about it in developmental psych books, but they don't talk about it in this book for some reason. So I'm going to have a little separate lecture on sleep training, and we'll get a little bit more into the shared sleeping too. One of the big objective reasons to possibly not do shared sleeping is that bed sharing is linked with a greater incidence of SIDS. SIDS is sudden infant death syndrome. It's a condition that occurs when the infants just stop breathing. Usually it's during the night, and usually they die suddenly without any apparent cause. And this has just got to be terrible, the worst. SIDS remains the highest cause of infant death in the United States. The risk is highest at 2 to 4 months. One of the things they recommend, the American Academy of Pediatrics recommends that infants are placed on their backs to sleep to reduce the risk on their backs. That's one big reason that they've found, but researchers have also found a multitude of other risk factors, that there's a correlation between SIDS and these other conditions. Some of them are an abnormal brainstem that's related to the releasing of serotonin. There's heart arrhythmias, sleep apnea, a low birth weight. We talked a little bit about that last chapter. Siblings that have died from SIDS. So if you've had one kid that died from SIDS, there's a potential that you're going to have more kids that will have SIDS. That's going to be the worst. Not just to have one, but to have it happen more than once. It's related to lower SES, and that's probably related to some other things like smoking, bed sharing, having soft bedding. These are all factors. And so with like the SES, you might be sharing a bed because you don't have a crib for the baby. And so there's could be all these different factors that are going in that are really just you could almost pinpoint them to the low SES. Relatedly, breastfeeding lowers the incidence of SIDS. So that's something to think about. On sleep in childhood, experts recommend that young children get about 11 to 14 hours of sleep each night. Most sleep throughout the night with one daytime nap. More than 40% of children may experience a sleep problem at some point, and I personally have experienced this, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in the separate video. Research indicates links between children's sleep problems and numerous negative developmental outcomes. Again, you want your baby to sleep. It is good for them developmentally, for their brain. If they're not getting enough sleep, if they're having these shorter sleep durations at 12, so you have a kid in childhood that's not sleeping enough. At 12, it predicted more heavy alcohol use, more marijuana use, and early childhood sleep issues were also related to emotional regulation and attention. So it works like a cycle. If you've got a kid and they're not sleeping well, they're not going to feel good the next day. And so their attention is going to be off. Their emotional regulation is going to be off. And it's just going to continually perpetuate this cycle. So again, you definitely want them to get the sleep for all kinds of positive developmental outcomes. It can even cause impairments in the actual brain structures and the functions. The brain doesn't quite develop the way it would have if they'd had enough sleep. Some things that can actually help this are a good relationship with the parents and good relationship between the parents. Is related to the kid sleeping better. So this makes sense. If the parents are getting along, the kid can sense that and they have a good night's sleep. If they're getting along with the parents, they have a good night's sleep. But if they can tell their parents are fighting all the time or they're not getting along with their parents, maybe they don't sleep as well, and then it causes all these negative developmental outcomes. Okay, for sleep in adolescence, in the U.S. especially, kids in adolescence are not getting enough sleep, and again, it leads to all kinds of negative things. It leads to risky behavior, it leads to substance use, things like this. When adolescents are given the opportunity to sleep as long as they'd like, most will sleep an average of almost 9.5 hours a night. Most get considerably less than this. You might think back to your own, like when you were 15, how much sleep you were getting. I know I was not getting 9.5 hours of sleep. A pretty famous researcher on this, Mary Charskaden, found that a hormonal phase shift involving the hormone melatonin may be contributing to this. And so basically what she found is that for in early adolescence, your melatonin is released earlier, and so you want to go to bed earlier. When you move into late adolescence, melatonin is released later. But what we did as a society is that we don't adjust things like that. So if you're in early adolescence, you go to bed, you go to school at 8. If you're late, you go to school at 8. Is kind of how things used to be. Things are changing now, and I have an article on this. I will try to post it that talks about the idea of that maybe kids in late adolescence should go to school later because then they're able to get the proper amount of sleep and everything else. Again, all these positive outcomes from getting enough sleep. So based on that finding, early school start times result in grogginess, lack of attention, poor test performance, and so now some schools are starting late, and I think they're divvying this out between the early and the late adolescence. All right, that's it for sleep in childhood. Next, we'll get into some health topics.